Samantha Hayes had once lived a quiet, predictable life. She worked as a librarian in a small-town library tucked away near the edge of town. She loved the scent of old books, the silence between shelves, and the soft rustling of pages being turned. She had always been a gentle spirit, soft-spoken, observant, and calm. But that all changed one spring evening, walking home from work. Samantha had become the unfortunate witness to a crime that turned her world upside down. Though she survived, what followed was worse than anything she'd read in the most unsettling mystery novels. Fear took root in her every movement. The calm world she had known became loud and dangerous. She couldn't sleep through the night, she couldn't walk alone, and she certainly couldn't trust people. Her days became filled with therapy sessions, locked doors, and shadows that followed her even in daylight. Her therapist, Dr. Keller, had seen this kind of post-traumatic anxiety before, but there was something unique about Samantha. She didn't just need healing, she needed someone who could stay by her side without asking questions or speaking at all. That's when he brought up the idea of a psychiatric service dog. At first, Samantha hesitated. A dog? She wasn't even sure she could take care of herself. But something about the thought of quiet companionship felt comforting. With the help of a local organization that specialized in pairing trauma survivors with trained service dogs, Samantha was introduced to a golden retriever named Atlas. The first time she met him, he walked over calmly, sat beside her, and leaned his head against her knee. No barking, no sniffing, just stillness. She didn't speak, and he didn't need her to. In that silence, something unspoken passed between them, something safe. Atlas was no ordinary dog. He was trained to sense shifts in breathing, heart rate, and stress levels. If Samantha began to panic, he would respond against her, laying at her feet, or even nudging her hand until she returned to the present. It was nothing short of remarkable. But what made their bond even more unique was that Samantha began to create her own system of silent cue gestures. Only she and Atlas understood. Since Samantha disliked being the center of attention, she didn't want to speak commands aloud. Instead, she taught Atlas gestures like tapping her wrist for stay, a quick chin nod for follow, and, most importantly, a small circle drawn with her finger for I need help. Day by day, she began venturing out again with Atlas by her side. Crowded sidewalks still made her uneasy, but with Atlas tucked against her leg, she could focus on his calm presence. She practiced their signals at home, reinforcing their silent language until it became second nature. They became a team, inseparable and in sync. When someone startled her from behind, Atlas would immediately take a defensive position in front of her. When crowds overwhelmed her, he guided her toward quiet corners. For the first time in months, she walked to the park. She even went back to the library not to work, but to sit in her favorite corner and read with Atlas lying peacefully at her feet. People noticed, of course, a woman and a service dog with eyes that never left each other. But no one dared approach them. They didn't need words to feel strong, but peace was temporary. One morning, Samantha received a letter in the mail. It was from the court. The case involving the incident she had witnessed was finally going to trial, and she, the key witness, would be required to testify. Her hands shook as she held the letter. Memories she had tried to bury came rushing back like a wave that wouldn't stop crashing. She wasn't sure she could face that room again, let alone the person at the center of it all. But as she looked down, Atlas placed his head gently on her lap. He didn't move. He didn't blink. He just waited. In that moment, she realized something powerful. She wasn't alone anymore. The days leading up to the trial were a blur. Samantha barely slept, and when she did, her dreams were filled with flashes of that night, the screams, the fear, and the silence that followed. Each morning, she woke up with her heart racing and her palms damp. But each time, Atlas was there. Not once did he fail to sense her unease, whether it was laying his head on her chest during a panic attack or placing his paw gently on her leg while she cried. Atlas stayed close. He didn't demand anything. He just stayed. Samantha's lawyer, Ms. Rowan, was kind and careful with her. She explained what the courtroom would look like, what questions to expect, and even walked her through what to do if she became overwhelmed. If you feel unsafe or too anxious, she said, let the judge know. You have every right to pause or step outside. We'll be with you. But it wasn't her lawyer she was worried about. It was the person she had to face, the man whose actions had torn her peace apart. On the morning of the hearing, Samantha dressed simply. She wore a soft, gray blouse and black pants. Nothing too bold, nothing too quiet, just something that felt like armor. Atlas wore his blue service vest, polished and clean. She looked at herself in the mirror and almost didn't recognize the woman standing there. Her eyes were tired, but they were steady. Arriving at the courthouse, Samantha gripped the leash tightly. The large glass building loomed in front of her, casting a reflection of herself and Atlas across the smooth surface. We can do this, she whispered. Atlas wagged his tail gently, brushing it against her leg. Inside, the courthouse was colder than she expected. Long halls, echoing footsteps, voices bouncing off marble walls. Every sound seemed louder, every face unfamiliar. Samantha walked slowly, staying close to Atlas. People glanced at her, some out of curiosity, others because dogs in court were still rare, but no one spoke. When they reached the courtroom door, her knees went weak. She stared at the handle, unmoving. She could already feel her heartbeat rising. Her fingers twitched near her side. Atlas moved. He stepped in front of her and turned to face her, his body blocking the courtroom door, as if shielding her from what lay beyond. He pressed his weight gently against her legs. She let her hand drop to his head and drew a small circle with her finger. Atlas leaned into her. She breathed. The courtroom was crowded. The defendant sat with his legal team, smug and seemingly relaxed. Samantha's lawyer guided her to the witness stand, Atlas taking his place beside her. The judge, an older woman with kind eyes, took a moment to recognize the service dog's presence. I understand this witness is accompanied by a certified service dog. Let the record reflect approval, she said. Samantha sat, her hands trembling slightly. The oath was given, and she raised her right hand. Her voice barely rose above a whisper as she said, "I do." Ms. Rowan began her questioning with care, helping Samantha walk through the details of that night. At first, the words came slowly. Samantha had to close her eyes several times to picture what she had seen. She described the moment she had rounded the corner. The struggle, the man, the fear. And Atlas stayed still. Not once did he break posture. He remained by her side like a sentry, watching her closely, responding to every pause in her breath. Then came the cross-examination. The defense lawyer's tone was colder, more direct. His questions were designed to shake her, to make her doubt. Is it possible you were confused? How can you be sure it was him? Isn't it true? You were frightened and not thinking clearly. Samantha's fingers curled, slightly at her side. Her chest tightened. The lights above felt hotter now, and the room seemed to shrink. The words became blurry. Without thinking, she gave the signal. She drew a small, silent circle in the air with her index finger. Atlas stood. The courtroom held its breath. Atlas stood up. The second Samantha gave the signal. It was a simple motion, just a soft circle drawn with her index finger near her knee. But to him, it meant everything. And now, it meant the world to her. He moved, gently, but with purpose, stepping in front of Samantha, positioning his body between her and the defense attorney. He didn't growl, he didn't bark. He simply stood there calm and alert, his eyes watching every movement like a shield. Come to life. The defense lawyer paused. For a moment, even he seemed taken aback. Your Honor, he started. The judge leaned forward slightly. Is there an issue, counselor? The lawyer blinked. The dog. He's blocking the witness. Ms. Rowan stood up. Your Honor, the dog is trained to respond to the emotional distress of the witness. She gave him a signal. He is doing exactly what he was meant to do. The judge glanced at Samantha. Her hand was still slightly raised in the air, frozen mid-gesture. She was trembling, but breathing more evenly now. Atlas looked up at her once and gently nudged her hand with his nose, grounding her again. Let the dog remain, the judge said firmly. Proceed with caution, counselor. A murmur swept through the courtroom. Some people whispered in awe. Others simply watched, surprised by the intelligence and timing of the dog's actions. But all eyes were now fixed on Samantha and Atlas. The defense attorney cleared his throat and continued, more carefully this time. Miss Hayes, you say you saw my client that night, but isn't it true you only caught a glimpse in the dark? Can you say, without any doubt, that it was him? Samantha gripped the edge of the stand for a moment. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Atlas turned slightly and leaned his body against her leg. She exhaled slowly and looked up. Ken, she said, I remember the sound of his voice. I remember his jacket, and I remember what he said when he saw me. That's something I'll never forget. The courtroom was silent again. Samantha's voice had returned, steady and certain. Atlas remained by her side, sitting now, but still alert. The rest of the cross-examination was challenging, but Samantha didn't falter. Each time her breath caught or her fingers began to tremble, Atlas would respond, nudging her gently, leaning into her leg, or brushing her hand with his nose. The connection between them was more than obedience. It was partnership. It was trust. As she finished her testimony, Ms. Rowan approached once more. No further questions, Your Honor, she said, her eyes briefly meeting Samantha's with a quiet nod of respect. Samantha stepped down from the witness stand, Atlas walking beside her with silent grace. The judge called for a short recess. As they left the room, reporters and observers whispered about what they had just seen. People had witnessed many testimonies over the years, but none quite like this. In the hallway, Samantha found a quiet bench and sat down, her hands finally still. She looked at Atlas and ran her fingers through his soft golden fur. You did it, she whispered. We did it. Atlas licked her wrist once, then laid his head in her lap. He didn't need to understand every word. He felt it, the relief in her body, the peace slowly returning. For so long, Samantha had lived in fear. But here, in this cold courthouse, surrounded by strangers, she had spoken the truth. And it wasn't just because of her strength. It was because of the silent protector who never left her side. What no one, in that courtroom, knew yet was that this trial was far from over. Atlas's most powerful moment had yet to come. After her testimony, Samantha thought the worst was behind her. For the first time in over a year, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel. The courtroom had been terrifying, but she had walked in, spoken her truth, and walked out with her dignity intact. And Atlas had been her rock the entire time. Still, the days that followed were heavy. Testifying had stirred up memories she had worked so hard to suppress. Every detail, every word, every shadow in that courtroom stayed with her like echoes bouncing off her thoughts. Atlas, as always, stayed close. He moved with her from room to room at home, never more than a few feet away. At night, when the nightmares returned, he jumped onto the bed without waiting for permission, laying across her legs until her breathing calmed. Despite her lingering fears, Samantha was determined not to let the anxiety drag her back into isolation. She resumed her walks through the park in the early mornings before it became crowded. She visited the library once more, sitting in the back corner where no one could sneak up behind her. And wherever she went, Atlas was there, walking slightly ahead, always checking back to make sure she was okay. The media, however, had not forgotten her. News of the trial and the remarkable service dog that had calmed the courtroom had begun to spread. A local newspaper ran a story titled, "The Dog That Spoke Without Words." Within days, it was picked up by national outlets. Samantha didn't seek attention, but the story wasn't about fame. It was about something deeper, courage. Through connection, letters began to arrive from people across the country. Survivors, veterans, parents of children with anxiety, all writing to thank her for showing them what healing could look like. She read them slowly, often with tears in her eyes. "You made me believe in something again." One woman wrote, "I've been afraid to leave my house for 3 years. But after seeing what you and your dog did, I'm going to try." Still, the trial wasn't over. Other witnesses came forward. Some testimonies helped. Others brought confusion. The defense worked hard to twist timelines and question motives. Samantha attended when she could, always accompanied by Atlas. Each time they entered the courtroom, the room seemed to pause less from curiosity now, and more from respect. One afternoon, during a particularly long session, the defense presented what they claimed to be new evidence, grainy video from a nearby security camera. It was hard to see. The footage was dark. The angle poor. Evidence argued it introduced reasonable doubt. The person in the video was wearing a hoodie, their face partially covered. That could be anyone, the attorney insisted. Samantha's stomach turned. She had expected this. The strategy was clear. Blurred the truth until it became forgettable. She sat still, her hand resting gently on Atlas's back, not giving the signal, but simply letting him know she was still here. The prosecution asked to recall Samantha for a brief response. Back on the stand, she was more composed this time, stronger, when asked to comment on the footage. She didn't try to identify the blurry figure. Instead, she told the court something far more powerful. "I don't claim to be perfect. I didn't see everything, but I remember how it felt. And I remember that voice." She paused. "No grainy video can take that away from me." The courtroom was silent again. The judge nodded, then called for another recess. As Samantha stepped down, someone in the back, an older woman with a walker, clapped once before covering her mouth in surprise. The judge didn't rebuke her. No one said a word. Outside, Samantha exhaled slowly, leaning against a stone wall near the courthouse steps. Atlas sat beside her, his eyes scanning the people around them. "How do you always know exactly what to do?" she whispered. Atlas leaned into her again. She smiled for the first time. That week, the storm wasn't over, but, for the first time, she believed she could stand through it. The final week of the trial arrived like a slow-moving thundercloud, unpredictable, heavy, and humming with tension. Samantha could feel the shift, not just in herself but in everyone who had gathered day after day in that courtroom. The stakes were higher now. Every word spoken, every piece of evidence presented could tip the scale. Atlas sensed it too. He had grown even more alert in the last few days, watching Samantha more closely, sticking tighter to her side even in the briefest moments. At home, he would sit near the front door when she paced the hallway, ready to go with her even before she reached for the leash. She didn't have to speak. He just knew. The day began with heavy rain, a steady patter that tapped the courthouse windows as if the world outside was trying to get in. Samantha wore a navy blue sweater, simple and soft. It had become her trial uniform. Nothing too loud, nothing too vulnerable. Atlas's vest was snug around his chest, his ID tag polished, until it gleamed. Inside the courtroom, tension buzzed in the air. The defense team was preparing its final arguments. Their goal was clear: to cast doubt, blur truth, and distract the jury from what they had already heard. Their final witness was someone Samantha hadn't expected: the defendant's co-worker. He claimed the accused had been at work the night of the incident. He spoke with certainty. Too much certainty. Samantha's heart pounded. She glanced at Ms. Rowan, who scribbled something in her notepad, her expression unreadable. The jury listened carefully, nodding slightly at the man's detailed account. It was working. Then came a strange moment. As the witness finished, the judge asked a question that changed everything. Sir, she said, you stated your colleague never left the building that night. Are you willing to swear to that under oath? Yes, Your Honor, the man said. I'm sure of it. Samantha felt her stomach twist, that word shirring in her ears. She had heard it once before, not from this man, but from the defendant. The night she saw him, she remembered hearing him laugh, smug and arrogant, as he ran off. You sure didn't see anything, he had shouted into the dark dot suddenly. That single word reopened a moment, buried deep in her memory, the tone, the exact pitch, the voice. She could hear it again, now clear, direct, and laced with contempt. She sat up straighter. Ms. Rowan stood and requested permission to bring Samantha back for a short rebuttal. The judge granted it. Samantha rose, hands clenched slightly, and walked to the stand. Atlas followed without hesitation. You've already given detailed testimony, Ms. Rowan said gently, but I need to ask, have you remembered anything new? Samantha paused. Yes, she said, I remembered a word. The courtroom stilled. She looked directly at the jury. The night it happened, I heard the person say something. He said, you sure didn't see anything. That voice, it's the same one I heard here in court. From the defendant, the room remained quiet. Every eye focused on her. She turned to the judge. I know that may not seem like much, but to me, that voice, it stuck. It was loud that night, louder than anything else. I didn't forget it. I couldn't. Just then, as if sensing the weight of the moment, Atlas rose slowly and stepped forward, placing himself in front of her again. He looked out at the courtroom as if declaring something without a sound. Samantha didn't give a signal this time. He moved on his own, and that was the moment that made the difference. People watched as Atlas, silent and composed, took one final stance in the courtroom, not as a dog reacting to a gesture, but as a companion choosing to protect, to speak without words. Even the judge leaned forward, her gaze lingering on Atlas before she turned back to Samantha. Thank you, Miss Hayes. Samantha left the stand, her steps stronger this time. She didn't need to look back. She had said what she came to say. And Atlas had said what she couldn't. The trial was officially over. The evidence had been presented. The witnesses had spoken, and the final arguments had echoed through the walls of the courtroom like thunder before a storm's end. Now, it was in the jury's hands. Samantha stood outside the courthouse, beneath the overhang, watching the rain drizzle down the courthouse steps. Atlas sat by her feet. Calm, as always, his fur slightly damp from the walk. She glanced down at him and offered a small, tired smile. We made it through, she whispered, but the waiting was its own kind of test. Inside, the jury had begun deliberations. No one knew how long it would take, hours, maybe days. Samantha had done everything she could, told her truth as clearly as her voice would allow. Now, she just had to hope that it had been enough. That evening, Samantha didn't sleep. She lay curled on her couch, still in her courtroom clothes, Atlas curled at her feet like a golden guardian. Every time she shut her eyes, she replayed the trial, the faces of the jurors, the smug confidence of the defense, the soft nod of the judge when Atlas had risen on his own. It was all there in her mind, looping like a movie she couldn't pause. The next morning, her phone buzzed just after 8 a.m. It was Ms. Rowan. The jury had reached a verdict. Samantha's heart leaped into her throat. The speed of it could mean anything. She arrived at the courthouse 30 minutes later. The hall outside the courtroom was already filled with reporters, some whispering into microphones, others adjusting cameras. Samantha tried not to look at them. Atlas walked slightly ahead, parting the crowd with his quiet authority. People stepped aside without needing to be asked. Ms. Rowan met her at the door. You okay? She asked. Samantha nodded, though her palms were damp. Just tell me when it's over. The courtroom was nearly full. The air buzzed with tension, though no one spoke above a whisper. Samantha sat at the front beside her lawyer, her back straight, her eyes focused on the wooden rail in front of her. Atlas sat at her feet, his tail curled neatly, watching the jury door. When the jury filed in, the room fell silent. The foreperson stood, a middle-aged woman with silver glasses and a calm, unreadable face. The judge nodded toward her. Has the jury reached a verdict? We have, Your Honor. The judge gestured for the paper to be handed forward. Time slowed. Every second stretched as if the universe were holding its breath. Samantha gripped the edge of her chair. Her breathing quickened slightly. Without thinking, her fingers brushed across Atlas's back. The judge opened the folded paper, read silently, and then looked up. Her voice was even. In the matter of the State versus Jackson Miller, on the charge of aggravated assault and attempted intimidation, we find the defendant guilty. There was a pause, like the room itself didn't know how to react. And then the silence cracked. Someone, in the back, gasped. The defendant's chair creaked as he slumped into it. Ms. Rowan touched Samantha's arm gently. "You did it," she whispered. "It's over." Samantha stared straight ahead, eyes wide, lips parted. Her ears rang with the sound of the one word she had been waiting over a year to hear. Guilty. Jody didn't cry, not yet. Instead, she reached down and wrapped both arms around Atlas, pulling him close. He leaned into her instantly, resting his head on her shoulder, as if he'd been waiting for this moment too. The judge spoke again, calling for order, announcing the next steps for sentencing, but Samantha barely heard it. The storm that had lived inside her for so long had finally begun to quiet. Outside, the rain had stopped when Samantha stepped into the open air, Atlas beside her. The sun was peeking through the clouds for the first time in days. Cameras clicked. Reporters shouted questions. But she didn't respond. She didn't need to. Atlas was calm. She was calm. Justice had spoken. And now, at last, she could begin again. In the days following the verdict, Samantha expected her world to go quiet. But instead, it got louder, just in a different way. News outlets ran headlines like "Golden Retriever helped secure courtroom victory" and "Silent Signal. Powerful testimony." Interviews were requested. Podcasts reached out, and TV producers called her phone for comment. She ignored almost all of it. It wasn't that she wasn't grateful, it was just overwhelming. She had fought so hard to be heard, but now that everyone was listening, she didn't quite know what to say. She stayed home for the most part, curtains drawn halfway, watching the world react from behind glass. Atlas kept her grounded through it all, just like he always had. If her breathing sped up, he responded. If her hands shook while making tea, he'd nudge her gently with his nose until she steadied. But something inside her was shifting. One morning, a letter arrived from a young girl named Ellie. The handwriting was shaky, the spelling slightly off. It read, "Dear Samantha, I saw you on TV with your dog Atlas. I have scary dreams too, and sometimes I can't talk when I'm sad. I told my mom I want a dog like yours. You made me feel brave. Thank you. Love, Ellie, age 9. Samantha sat with that letter in her lap for a long time. She read it again and again until the words stopped blurring. That afternoon, she made her first public post online, a short note with a photo of Atlas lying across her lap. It read, "Healing doesn't have to be loud. Sometimes it walks quietly beside you and listens before it speaks. Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Ellie." Within minutes, it was shared hundreds of times. What surprised Samantha wasn't just the support, but how many people began sharing their own stories. Veterans with PTSD, survivors of violence, children with severe anxiety, all talking about how service dogs had transformed their lives. It wasn't just a story about one courtroom anymore. It was about thousands of invisible battles being fought in silence, with companions who didn't need words to help. Inspired by the response, Samantha began volunteering, first at the same service dog center that had introduced her to Atlas, then later at a local support group for trauma survivors. She didn't speak much at first, but when she did, she chose her words carefully, like seeds planted with purpose. She met families who were on waiting lists for trained dogs. She met teens who had stopped going to school due to panic attacks. And she met parents like Ellie, mom, who cried openly while thanking her for simply showing what healing could look like. One night, after a particularly emotional session, Samantha sat by her window with a notebook on her lap and Atlas curled at her feet. She began writing, not just about the trial, but about everything. The fear, the silence, the day she first met Atlas, the moment he rose in court without her asking, the first time she slept through the night with him nearby. Page after page, filled up with memories that once haunted her, now softened by time and courage. A few weeks later, she was invited to speak at a regional conference for therapy and trauma recovery. She was hesitant, unsure if she was ready. Public speaking had never been her strength, but Ms. Rowan, who had become a close friend, gently encouraged her. "They don't need you to be perfect," she said, "they just need you to be real." Samantha accepted. When the day came, she stood before a room of strangers with Atlas at her side. Her voice trembled at first, but she told her story. She talked about fear, about isolation, about how a dog's quiet strength helped her rebuild a voice she thought was lost forever. When she finished, the room rose in applause. Not loud, not thunderous, but long and heartfelt. Atlas didn't react to the clapping. He simply sat beside her, calm as ever, looking up as if to say, "See?" And she had. A full year had passed since the trial ended. But for Samantha, time no longer felt like something she was running from. It now moved forward, not in leaps or dramatic milestones, but in quiet, steady strides. She still remembered everything, of course. Healing didn't mean forgetting. The trial, the courtroom, the stare of the man who once terrified her, those images lived in a corner of her memory, but they no longer ruled her. What had taken their place was something unexpected. Purpose. After the conference where she spoke for the first time, Samantha received dozens of messages, many asking how to train a dog like Atlas, others simply wanting to say thank you. It was humbling, and in the quiet days that followed, she knew she wanted to do more than just tell her story. She wanted to help others create their own. With the help of the service dog center that had once paired her with Atlas, she launched a small outreach program. It started simple. She organized weekend meets between survivors and trained support animals. Then she began developing training sessions that taught people how to use silent signals, just like she had with Atlas. The idea grew. Families showed up. Veterans, teachers, even first responders. She called the program Silent Steps because sometimes progress didn't announce itself. Sometimes it walked beside you quietly, waiting for the moment you were ready. Atlas, of course, was the heart of it all. He had aged a bit over the year. His muzzle now had streaks of white, and he moved a little slower than he used to. But his eyes were still bright, and his connection with Samantha had only deepened. Even without a signal, he could read her. One glance, one breath, and he was already there. One afternoon, during a Silent Steps session, a young boy named Aaron stood off to the side. He hadn't spoken since witnessing a car accident a year earlier. His parents had brought him in hopes that maybe being around trained dogs could help. Samantha knelt down beside him. Atlas sat on her other side. "Would you like to give him a signal?" she asked softly. Aaron didn't reply. He simply looked at Atlas, then at her, and slowly drew a small circle in the air. Atlas rose and walked over to the boy, sitting right in front of him. Then he laid his head gently on Aaron's knee. The boy didn't speak, but his shoulders relaxed. His hand hovered for a moment, then touched Atlas's head. The connection was instant. Aaron's mother covered her mouth as tears filled her eyes. Moments like that reminded Samantha why she kept going. Because sometimes the loudest breakthroughs came from the quietest moments, and because she knew what it felt like to be trapped in silence, waiting for someone or something to reach in and pull you out. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Samantha sat on her porch with Atlas beside her. They watched the neighborhood kids play in the distance. Life had returned to the world around her, but more importantly, it had returned to the world within her. She looked down at Atlas, whose head now rested on her foot. "You changed my life," she whispered. "You gave me back my voice, and when I needed you the most, you stood up for me." Atlas didn't respond, at least not with sound. He simply wagged his tail and blinked slowly, peaceful and proud. Samantha leaned back and closed her eyes, letting the breeze brush her face. Some people saw dogs as just pets, others understood their loyalty. But Samantha knew something deeper. Some dogs were protectors, healers, listeners, and some, like Atlas, were heroes who didn't need to speak to leave a courtroom in the world forever changed. Because long after the trial ended and the headlines faded, people still remembered the moment one woman gave a silent signal, and the dog who stood up and said everything without a single word.